I raised his children while he loved another woman, so I left with the truth they hid. My name is Mary Hart. I was 26 when I married Dennis Whitmore. People in our town treated him like a tragic hero. His wife had supposedly died 3 years earlier, leaving him alone with 2 small children. Lucas was 6. Sophie was 4. Everyone admired the quiet sadness Dennis carried in his eyes. Everyone admired me for stepping into the empty space beside him. "You're saving that family," people told me. At first, I believed them. I met Dennis at the bookstore where I worked after college. He came in every Saturday with the children. Lucas liked adventure stories. Sophie always carried a stuffed rabbit with one missing eye. Dennis looked exhausted every time I saw him, and I slowly became part of their routine. First came conversations, then dinners, then birthdays. Before long, I could not imagine my life without them. The night Dennis proposed, Lucas hugged my waist and asked if I would stay forever. Sophie climbed into my lap and called me Mama by accident. Dennis looked emotional when it happened. "You don't have to replace anyone," he whispered. I promised him I never would. I did not know then that I was already living inside a lie so deep it would one day destroy every part of me. Our wedding was small and simple. Dennis said he could not handle a large celebration after losing his first wife. I respected that. I wanted to protect his peace, even then. The children stood beside us during the ceremony. Lucas held the rings with shaking hands while Sophie scattered flower petals too early and giggled about it afterward. I remember thinking how lucky I was to belong somewhere. After the wedding, I moved into Dennis's large grey house near the edge of town. It already felt lived in before I arrived. Family pictures covered the walls, though I noticed something strange almost immediately. There were very few photographs of Dennis's late wife. Most were blurry. Some showed only her back. Others were framed so far away that her face could barely be seen. When I asked Dennis about it, his expression tightened. "She hated cameras," he said quietly. I apologized for asking. Over time, I stopped noticing the missing details because life became busy. Lucas struggled with nightmares. Sophie cried whenever storms rolled through town. Dennis worked long hours at an accounting firm downtown. I became the center holding everything together. I packed lunches, helped with homework, sat beside Fevers through the night, and somewhere along the way, I stopped being Mary. I became the woman everyone needed. The first few years passed quickly. Lucas learnt to ride a bike beside me, not Dennis. Sophie lost her first tooth while I braided her hair before school. Every memory inside that house slowly wrapped itself around me until I could no longer tell where their pain ended and my sacrifices began. Dennis appreciated me in quiet ways. He thanked me for dinners, kissed my forehead before work, bought flowers on birthdays. To anyone watching, we looked stable and happy, but there were moments I could never fully explain. Sometimes Dennis disappeared emotionally for days. He would stare out windows without speaking. Other times, he became distant whenever the children mentioned their mother. Lucas once asked if she loved baseball like he did. Dennis snapped so suddenly that all of us froze. "Stop asking questions!" he barked. Lucas looked crushed. Later, Dennis apologized and blamed stress from work. I accepted the explanation because I loved him. Love makes excuses long before it accepts truth. Years passed. Lucas turned 12. Sophie turned 10. I attended every school meeting and every doctor appointment. Teachers called me their mother automatically. The children introduced me that way too. Deep inside, though, something always felt unfinished in our home. Like there was a locked room nobody wanted me to open. I ignored the feeling because I believed loyalty meant silence. By the time I turned 35, I barely recognized myself anymore. My entire life revolved around caring for everyone else. Dennis's career had grown successful, which meant he traveled more often. Lucas entered high school. Sophie joined dance classes 3 evenings each week. I moved through life like a machine, built for other people's comfort. Still, I told myself I was happy. Then the phone calls started. At first, they seemed harmless. Dennis would leave the room whenever his phone rang late at night. Sometimes he stepped outside to talk. Other times he whispered in the garage with the door cracked open. One evening, I asked who kept calling. "Work problems," he answered too quickly. I wanted to believe him. But after that, I began noticing everything. The way he smiled faintly at certain messages, the way his mood changed after business trips, the way he carried sadness that no longer seemed connected to grief. One night, Sophie asked me a question while I folded laundry beside her bed. "Do you think Daddy still misses Mum every day?" I paused carefully. "Yes," I said. "I think some losses stay forever." Sophie looked thoughtful. I wish I remembered her face better. The words hit me strangely. 15 years had passed since her supposed death, yet there were almost no stories, no clear photographs, no relatives who ever visited to speak about her. It suddenly felt unnatural. A month later, Dennis left for another conference in Chicago. He kissed my cheek before sunrise and promised he would return by Friday night. Lucas barely looked up from breakfast when he left. Their relationship had become strained during recent years. "You're never here anyway," Lucas muttered after the door closed. I defended Dennis automatically. "He works hard for this family." Lucas shrugged but said nothing else. That afternoon, I cleaned Dennis's study while Sophie attended dance practice. Normally, I avoided touching anything in that room because Dennis hated people moving his papers. But dust covered the shelves, and I wanted the house to feel organized. While wiping his desk, I noticed one drawer remained locked. I almost ignored it. Then curiosity won. The key hung underneath the desk with tape wrapped around it. My stomach tightened as I unlocked the drawer and pulled it open slowly. Inside sat an old wooden box, tied with a faded blue ribbon. At first, I thought they were work documents. Then I noticed handwriting across the top envelope. Dennis. Not dear husband. Not Mr. Whitmore. Just Dennis. My hands trembled while opening the first letter. I still think about the children every day. I miss Lucas losing his baby teeth. I wonder if Sophie still sleeps with that rabbit. The letter was signed with one name, Claire. My heartbeat stopped completely. I read every letter sitting on the floor beside Dennis's desk. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows while my entire world cracked apart one sentence at a time. The letters stretched across almost 20 years. Some were angry. Some begged forgiveness. Some spoke about love that never truly ended. But every page carried one terrible truth. Claire was alive. Alive, while I spent 15 years believing she was buried in some cemetery far away. I searched frantically through the box until I found older documents hidden beneath the letters. Birth certificates, legal papers, hospital records. Then, folded carefully at the bottom, I discovered a newspaper clipping from 16 years earlier. Local woman leaves family after domestic dispute. No death, no illness, no funeral, just disappearance. My vision blurred. The article explained that Claire had left town after neighbors reported a violent argument between her and Dennis. No charges were filed. Soon afterward, Dennis publicly claimed Claire died while visiting relatives out of state. Most people accepted the story without question. Even me! I pressed both hands against my mouth to stop myself from screaming. Every bedtime story I told those children suddenly felt stolen. Every time they cried for a mother they believed dead, Dennis allowed it. And somewhere beyond our town, Claire had spent years writing letters to children who never received them. I barely slept that night. After hiding the box exactly where I found it, I sat awake in darkness, replaying every year of my marriage. Every missing detail suddenly formed one horrible picture. Dennis never spoke about Claire because grief hurt too much. He never visited a grave because there was none. The children remembered almost nothing because they had been taught not to ask questions. At 6 a.m, my phone buzzed. A message from Dennis. "Flight delayed. Home tomorrow morning. Love you." I stared at the words until my chest hurt. Love you. Did he ever? Or had I simply been useful? When Lucas came downstairs for breakfast, I studied his face carefully. He had Dennis's eyes, but Claire's smile. Sophie followed behind him, wearing fuzzy socks and carrying her old rabbit, though it looked worn with age now. I nearly broke apart watching them laugh over cereal. These children trusted me completely. I wanted to tell them everything immediately. Instead, fear stopped me. What if the truth destroyed them? What if they hated me for hiding it once I discovered it? That afternoon, I drove to the public records office downtown. I needed proof before confronting Dennis. A clerk helped me search older files, and after nearly an hour, she handed me copies confirming Claire had never been declared dead. My marriage collapsed completely inside that courthouse, because lies that survive 15 years are never accidents. They are choices. Dennis returned home Saturday morning carrying coffee and airport exhaustion. He smiled when he saw me standing in the kitchen. "You're awake early," he said. I placed the wooden box on the table between us. The color drained from his face instantly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he sat down slowly, staring at the ribbon like it was something poisonous. "Where did you find that?" he whispered. "In your locked drawer." Dennis rubbed both hands over his face. He looked older suddenly, like the truth had finally reached him too. "You shouldn't have opened it." I laughed softly, because the sentence felt absurd. "You let me raise her children while she was alive." He flinched hard at my words. "It's complicated." "No," I said quietly. "It's evil." Dennis began explaining everything at once. Claire left after years of fighting. She struggled with depression after Sophie was born. Their marriage became toxic. One night, she packed a suitcase and disappeared. Months later, she tried returning, but Dennis refused to let her near the children. "She abandoned them," he insisted. "So you killed her instead?" I snapped. Tears filled his eyes unexpectedly. I thought it was better this way. I stared at the man I spent 15 years loving and realized I did not know him at all. Not even a little. The argument lasted hours. Dennis paced the kitchen while I sat frozen beside the table. Every explanation sounded worse than the last. He admitted Claire wrote letters constantly during the first few years after leaving town. Sometimes she mailed birthday gifts too. Dennis burned most of them before the children ever saw them. "She wasn't stable," he repeated. "Who decided that?" I demanded. "She left them, and you erased her." His silence answered everything. By evening, Lucas walked into the house and sensed tension immediately. Sophie followed behind him carrying dance shoes over one shoulder. "What happened?" Lucas asked carefully. Neither of us answered. Dennis finally told the children we needed privacy, but Lucas crossed his arms stubbornly. "No, something's wrong." I looked at Dennis then, truly looked at him. 15 years earlier, I would have protected his secrets automatically. I would have convinced myself silence helped this family survive. But silence was exactly how this lie survived so long. "You deserve the truth," I said softly. Dennis stood quickly. "Mary, don't!" Lucas frowned, while Sophie gripped her rabbit tighter. My voice shook as I spoke. "Your mother isn't dead." The room went completely silent. Then Sophie laughed nervously. "That's not funny." I wished with everything inside me that it had been a joke. The next hour shattered our family beyond repair. Lucas demanded proof immediately. Sophie cried before I even finished explaining. Dennis kept interrupting, trying to control the story, but the children no longer trusted him enough to listen calmly. "You lied to us our whole lives?" Lucas shouted. "I was protecting you," Dennis insisted. "From what? Having a mother?" Sophie sat curled beside the couch, shaking violently. I moved toward her carefully, but she pulled away at first. The rejection hurt more than I expected. Finally, I showed them the letters. Sophie read only 3 pages before bursting into tears again. Lucas read every single one silently, growing angrier with each paragraph. By midnight, he could barely look at Dennis without disgust. "You stole our lives," he whispered. Dennis reached toward him desperately. "Son, don't call me that right now." I had never seen Lucas cry before that night. When he finally walked upstairs, Sophie followed behind him without speaking. Dennis collapsed into a chair afterward. staring at the floor. "You ruined everything," he said quietly. The words stunned me. "You ruined it," I answered. For a long time, neither of us moved. Then I realized something terrifying. Even after being exposed, Dennis still cared more about losing control than losing me. That was the moment my marriage truly ended inside my heart. The house became unbearable after the truth surfaced. Lucas refused to speak to Dennis except when necessary. Sophie locked herself inside her room for 2 days straight. Every hallway felt heavy with betrayal. I tried comforting them both, but guilt followed me everywhere. Even though I had not known the truth before, I still felt responsible somehow. "You didn't lie to us," Lucas said one evening while helping me wash dishes. "But I helped live the lie." He shook his head slowly. "You loved us. That part was real." His words nearly broke me. Meanwhile, Dennis moved through the house like a ghost. He barely slept. Some nights I heard him crying quietly in his study. A small part of me still pitied him despite everything. That frightened me more than anger did. 3 days later, Sophie knocked softly on my bedroom door after midnight. "Can I sleep here?" I opened the blankets immediately. She curled beside me the same way she had during thunderstorms as a child. After several minutes, she whispered something that crushed my heart. "Did my real mum stop loving us?" I swallowed hard before answering. "No. She wrote to you constantly." "Then why didn't she come back?" I hesitated carefully. Sometimes adults hurt each other so badly that nobody knows how to fix it. Sophie cried herself asleep, holding my hand. And I realized love alone could never repair what Dennis destroyed. A week later, I found Claire's phone number hidden inside one of the letters. I stared at it for nearly an hour before gathering enough courage to call. A woman answered on the 4th ring. "Hello." Her voice sounded older than I imagined. Softer too. My throat tightened. "Claire?" Silence. "Yes?" "My name is Mary." Another silence followed, heavier this time. Then she whispered, "He married you." I closed my eyes briefly. "Yes." Claire began crying almost immediately. Not loud sobs. Quiet, exhausted tears that sounded years old. "I wrote to them every birthday," she said. "Every Christmas. I begged him to let me speak to them." "Why did you leave?" Her breathing shook over the phone. "Because your husband scared me." The words sent cold fear through my chest. Claire explained years of screaming fights, broken furniture, controlling behavior, and emotional cruelty. The night she left, Dennis punched a hole through a wall beside her head during an argument. She packed a suitcase after he fell asleep and disappeared before sunrise. "I thought leaving would calm things down," she admitted. Instead, he erased me. I sat speechless for several seconds. "Do the children know?" "Yes." Claire started crying harder then. "For 15 years, this woman mourned children who were still alive, while I unknowingly raised them inside the lie that buried her. Nothing about that felt human." I did not tell Dennis about the phone call immediately. Part of me feared what he might do if he learned Claire and I had spoken. Another part simply needed time to process everything. The next morning, I began packing boxes quietly. Not many. Just enough to leave. Dennis found me folding clothes into a suitcase after dinner. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I can't stay here." He looked stunned, despite everything. "You're leaving me now?" I almost laughed. "You lost me years ago." Dennis stepped closer carefully. "Mary, please. We can fix this." "No, you can't." His face twisted with desperation. "I love you." The sentence hurt more than anger would have. "Maybe you do," I answered softly. "But you loved someone else while I carried your entire life on my back." "That isn't true." "It is." I explained how every letter still spoke about Claire with longing, how his eyes changed whenever her name appeared, how he never truly let her go, even while building a marriage with me. Dennis sank onto the bed slowly. "You were the best thing that ever happened to this family." I stared at him for a long moment before replying. "Being useful is not the same as being loved." His expression shattered then because he knew I was right. And some truths arrived too late to save anything. Leaving the children felt impossible. That was the hardest part. Not Dennis. Never Dennis. Lucas found me carrying boxes toward my car 2 days later. His face tightened immediately. You're really going? I nodded slowly. For a while. He looked furious suddenly. He's the one who lied. Why do you have to leave? Because staying would destroy me, I thought. But I could not place that burden on him. Instead, I touched his shoulder, gently. Sometimes people need distance before they disappear completely inside their pain. Lucas looked away, jaw clenched tightly. You're my mum, he whispered. The words nearly made me stay. Sophie cried openly when I hugged her goodbye. She tucked a folded drawing into my bag before I left. It showed the 4 of us standing together near the ocean. Underneath, she wrote one sentence in messy handwriting. Thank you for loving us anyway. I drove away before either child saw me break down. The coastal town where I rented a small apartment sat 3 states away. It overlooked grey water and quiet streets lined with old bookstores and coffee shops. Nobody there knew my history. Nobody expected anything from me. The silence felt terrifying at first. For 15 years, someone always needed me. Now I woke each morning without purpose. And healing, I learned, begins painfully quiet. The first month alone nearly crushed me. I rented a tiny apartment above a bakery near the harbour. Every morning smelled like warm bread and salt water. People smiled politely, but never asked personal questions. At first, the loneliness echoed through every room. I kept reaching for responsibilities that no longer existed. I woke early expecting school lunches to pack. I listened for Sophie's footsteps during storms. I almost bought Lucas baseball socks while shopping one afternoon before remembering he no longer lived with me. The grief arrived in strange moments like that. I found part-time work teaching art classes at a community centre nearby. Most of my students were older women recovering from illnesses or loss. They painted quietly while soft music played in the background. One woman named Ruth noticed my sadness immediately. You spent your whole life caring for others, she said one afternoon. Now you don't know who you are without the work. Her words unsettled me because they were true. At night, Dennis continued calling, sometimes 20 times in a row. I ignored every message. Lucas texted occasionally. Sophie sent photos of sunsets she thought I would like. Neither child mentioned Dennis much. Then one evening, a single message appeared from an unknown number. Thank you for telling them the truth, Claire. I stared at those words for hours afterward. 2 months after leaving, I finally agreed to meet Claire. We chose a quiet cafe halfway between our towns. I arrived early and nearly lost my nerve twice before she walked through the door. She looked ordinary. That sounds cruel, but after carrying someone like a ghost inside my marriage for 15 years, I expected something larger than life. Instead, Claire looked tired, nervous, and deeply human. We stared at each other awkwardly before sitting down. You're prettier than I imagined, she admitted softly. I almost laughed at the absurdity of that sentence. You ruined my life without even knowing me, I answered before I could stop myself. Pain crossed her face immediately. I know. For 2 hours, we talked carefully through years of damage. Claire showed me copies of returned letters Dennis never delivered, birthday cards marked unopened, photographs she mailed that disappeared completely. He wanted them to forget me, she whispered. Why didn't you fight harder? I was scared. I believed her. There was no manipulation in Claire's voice, only regret. Before leaving, she reached across the table hesitantly. You loved my children when I couldn't, she said. I'll spend the rest of my life grateful for that. I did not know how to respond, because somehow, despite everything, we were both victims of the same man. And that truth felt heavier than hatred ever could. Winter arrived early along the coast. Rain covered the streets almost daily, and the ocean looked silver beneath thick clouds. Slowly, my life settled into something quieter. I painted more, read more, slept without fear for the first time in years. Then Lucas appeared unexpectedly outside my apartment one Saturday afternoon. I opened the door and froze. He had grown taller again somehow. His shoulders looked broader, older, but his eyes still carried the same sadness from the night. Everything collapsed. What are you doing here? I asked. He shrugged awkwardly. I missed you. That simple answer unraveled me completely. Lucas stayed the weekend. We walked along the harbor, eating fried seafood from paper baskets, while he told me about school, baseball practice, and the silence inside the house after I left. He barely talks anymore, Lucas admitted about Dennis. Sophie only answers him when she has to. I felt guilty hearing it, yet not guilty enough to return. That night, Lucas sat beside my apartment window watching rain slide down the glass. I met Claire, he said quietly. My chest tightened. How was it? He thought carefully before answering. Sad. She cried a lot. Then he looked directly at me. But she isn't my mum the way you are. I turned away quickly so he would not see me cry. After Lucas visited, Sophie began calling every evening before bed. Sometimes we talked for hours about small things that had nothing to do with the past. Other nights, she simply wanted company while finishing homework. One rainy Thursday, her voice sounded unusually nervous. Daddy's coming there tomorrow. My stomach dropped. Why? He said he wants to fix things. I closed my eyes briefly. Some damage cannot be repaired, I thought. But Dennis arrived the next afternoon anyway. He looked thinner than before. Exhaustion hung beneath his eyes. For a second, seeing him standing outside my apartment almost pulled me backward into old habits of comfort and forgiveness. Almost. I miss you, he said immediately. I folded my arms tightly. You miss what I did for you? That's not fair. No? Then tell me one thing you truly knew about me, besides what I could carry. Dennis opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Silence answered better than words. We walked beside the harbor, while cold wind pushed waves against the docks. Dennis apologized repeatedly. He admitted he never stopped loving Claire completely, but insisted he loved me too. I built a life with you, he said desperately. You built a replacement, I answered. That truth finally broke him. He cried openly near the water while strangers passed around us, pretending not to notice. For the first time, I felt nothing except sadness. Love had left quietly, long before I did. Dennis stayed in town for 2 days. He rented a nearby hotel and kept asking for another chance. Every conversation ended the same way. I can change. You already had 15 years. On his final evening, he asked if we could have dinner together one last time. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We sat inside a small seafood restaurant overlooking the ocean. Candlelight reflected softly against the windows while storms rolled outside. It almost felt romantic if I ignored the history between us. Halfway through dinner, Dennis finally admitted something I had suspected for weeks. When Claire left, I hated her for abandoning me, he said quietly. Then I hated myself, because part of me still wanted her back. I remained silent. You came into our lives when everything was broken. You made the children happy again. You made me feel normal. Normal isn't love, I replied. His eyes filled slowly. I think I knew that. That confession hurt more than shouting ever could. Because somewhere deep inside, Dennis understood exactly what he had done to me all those years. He accepted my devotion, while emotionally living somewhere else entirely. Before leaving the restaurant, he placed his wedding ring on the table between us. I'm sorry, he whispered. Then he walked away into the rain, carrying the ruins of his own choices, and I finally stopped feeling responsible for saving him. The divorce finalized 6 months later. Dennis did not fight anything. He signed every paper quietly and agreed to whatever terms my lawyer suggested. We sold the old house shortly afterward because neither of us could bear living there anymore. Lucas started college the following year. Sophie finished high school with honors. Both visited me often. Life slowly rebuilt itself into something different from happiness, but gentler than pain. Claire also became part of the children's lives again, though carefully. Years of absence cannot disappear overnight. Some wounds heal slowly because trust grows slower than grief. One afternoon, Sophie asked if Claire and I hated each other. The question startled both of us. Claire smiled sadly before answering first. No. We lost different things to the same lie. That sentence stayed with me long afterward. Because, despite everything, Bitterness eventually exhausted me. Carrying anger for years felt too much like carrying Dennis's secrets all over again. One spring morning, Lucas graduated college. Claire sat beside me during the ceremony, while Sophie waved proudly from the front row. Dennis attended too, though quietly from a distance. When Lucas crossed the stage, he looked directly toward us. All three of us stood cheering at the same time. For one brief moment, our broken family existed together without lies. And somehow, that felt enough. People often imagine freedom arrives dramatically. They think healing looks powerful and immediate, like storms ending in sunlight. For me, it arrived quietly. One Tuesday morning, nearly 3 years after leaving Dennis, I realized I had gone an entire day without thinking about him at all. That frightened me at first. Then it felt beautiful. My life along the coast had become steady. I still taught art classes at the community center. I rented a slightly larger apartment now, one with windows facing the ocean directly. I adopted an old golden dog named Maple, who followed me everywhere and snored loudly beside the couch. Simple things began making me happy again. Coffee at sunrise, rain against the roof, painting without checking the clock constantly. Lucas visited after starting his first teaching job nearby. Sophie attended nursing school 2 hours away and called almost every night. Claire occasionally joined us for dinners during holidays. The arrangement looked strange from outside, but somehow it worked. Dennis remained distant. The children forgave him slowly, though never completely. One evening, Lucas asked something unexpected while helping me cook dinner. "Do you regret raising us?" I turned toward him immediately. "Never. But knowing everything now," I interrupted softly. "You were never the mistake." Lucas hugged me tightly after that, and for the first time in years, I truly believed my love had mattered beyond the lies surrounding it. 4 years after I left, Dennis suffered a mild heart attack. Sophie called me crying from the hospital waiting room late one night. Without thinking, I drove 3 hours through heavy rain to be there beside her and Lucas. Old habits never disappear completely. When I arrived, Dennis looked smaller somehow. Age and regret had finally settled visibly across his face. Machines beeped softly around him, while pale hospital light filled the room. He looked surprised to see me. "You came. Your children needed support," I answered carefully. Dennis nodded slowly. After the children stepped out for coffee, silence filled the room between us. I expected anger or awkwardness, but instead, I felt only exhaustion. "I wasted a lot of years," he admitted quietly. "Yes, I hurt everyone trying to hold on to something already broken." The honesty caught me off guard. Dennis stared toward the window for a long time before speaking again. "You were the best mother those children could have asked for." Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. For years, I wanted acknowledgement for everything I sacrificed. Yet hearing it now brought little satisfaction. Because some apologies arrive after the damage becomes permanent. Before leaving the hospital, Dennis stopped me gently. "I hope someday you find someone who loves you fully." I looked at him carefully. Then I answered with complete honesty. I finally learned how to love myself fully first, and that mattered more. After Dennis's illness, the children worked harder to rebuild their relationship with him. They visited often and encouraged him to attend family events again. The process remained uncomfortable sometimes, but honesty slowly replaced silence. One summer afternoon, Sophie invited all of us to a picnic near the lake for her nursing school graduation. I almost declined after learning Dennis would attend too, but Lucas convinced me otherwise. "We can't keep living divided forever," he said, so I went. Claire arrived first, carrying homemade sandwiches, while Sophie arranged decorations under a large oak tree. Dennis appeared later, looking nervous enough to turn around at any second. For a while, everyone moved carefully around old wounds. Then something unexpected happened. We laughed. Real laughter. Lucas accidentally dropped lemonade across the blanket, and Sophie nearly fell into the lake trying to save the food basket. Claire teased Dennis about his terrible grilling skills. For a few brief hours, the past loosened its grip on us. At sunset, Sophie pulled me aside quietly. "You know," she said, "I used to think families either survived or broke forever. And now?" She smiled softly. "Now I think some families rebuild differently." I watched Lucas teaching Claire how to throw a baseball, while Dennis cleaned dishes nearby. Nothing about our story looked traditional, but after years of lies, honesty itself had become its own kind of home. 5 years after leaving Dennis, I returned to our old town for the first time. The bookstore where we met still stood downtown. The owner recognized me immediately and hugged me tightly while asking questions about my life near the coast. Walking those streets again felt strange, like visiting someone else's memories. So much pain had started there, yet somehow I no longer felt trapped by it. Lucas and Sophie insisted on taking me to dinner that evening. Claire joined us too. Halfway through the meal, Sophie handed me a small wrapped box with nervous excitement. Inside sat a silver bracelet engraved with 4 words. "Thank you for staying." My throat closed instantly. "You didn't have to do this," I whispered. "Yes, we did," Lucas answered. Claire smiled gently across the table. "They know who raised them." Those words healed something inside me I did not realize still hurt. Later that night, while walking alone past the old grey house Dennis once owned, I stopped beside the sidewalk quietly. Another family lived there now. Warm light glowed through the windows, while children laughed somewhere inside. For years, that house represented betrayal to me. Now it simply looked like a place where people once struggled to love each other correctly. And finally, after everything, I could leave those memories there without carrying them home again. I am 46 now. Sometimes people ask if I regret leaving after learning the truth. They expect hesitation, because walking away from 15 years sounds impossible to most people. But I learned something important. Love cannot survive where truth is buried. For years, I confused sacrifice with devotion. I believed exhaustion proved loyalty. I thought being needed meant being valued. But real love does not ask someone to disappear so completely that they forget themselves. Dennis taught me that painfully. The children taught me something better afterward. Lucas married last autumn beneath a cliff overlooking the ocean. Sophie cried during the ceremony, while Claire held my hand tightly beside her. When the music ended, Lucas surprised everyone by pulling me onto the dance floor first. "You started this family," he whispered. I cried harder than I expected. Dennis watched from nearby with quiet sadness, but also acceptance. Time had softened all of us in different ways. Later that evening, Sophie rested her head against my shoulder and smiled. "You know what's strange?" she said. "None of us ended up where we thought we would." I looked around at our complicated, imperfect family beneath glowing lights and answered honestly, maybe that's why we finally found the truth. Because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is leave the life that is breaking them. And sometimes, leaving finally teaches everyone how to heal.